So there's a lot of research, a lot of strong theoretical foundations for what we talk about when we talk about building intimacy. There's a book by John Gottman called The Science of Trust. And Mr. Gottman is Jewish, I believe. Every time I've ever seen him speak, he's worn a yarmulke. But he's a frustrated researcher. He's got a PhD in psychology, but he likes to do empirical-based studies. He's the only guy that was doing empirical-based research on marriages for a number of years. You know, in the early days of marriage therapy, it was kind of like chicken soup for the soul. And it was anecdotal wisdom, but there was no real hard science behind it. And so he starts doing some science behind it. And one of the studies he did was on the science of trust. And at the end of their study, their conclusion about what it takes to build trust is almost a verbatim quote from Philippians chapter 2. You don't think about yourself, but you think about others. And that's it. And so when you talk about conflict resolution, you talk about communication, you talk about love languages, you talk about attunement, any of the things that we need to talk about to build better marriages or build stronger marriages is going to boil down to this idea of selfish versus selfless. So if you have your Bibles, look at Philippians chapter 2. And Paul is writing to a church here that he's very familiar with. And it's interesting that they are as close as they are. You read the book of Philippians and you get this idea that Paul and the church members at Philippi are super, super, super connected. Paul probably spent less than 21 days in Philippi. You read that story in Acts. They end up in Philippi. They go down to the river. They meet some ladies. They baptize Lydia. They're walking around for several days. This girl with a spirit starts declaring that these men are the servants of the Most High God. Paul gets tired of it, casts the spirit out. The people who own the girl don't like the fact that they've lost their income. They beat him, put him in jail. They're singing it in jail. An earthquake comes. They baptize the dead and his family. And the next day the magistrates say, hey, y'all can leave town. And Paul says, well, you beat me. I'm a Roman citizen. You condemn me. And you need to come escort me out of the jail. And that's it. And so depending on how you translate several days and many days, Paul's in the town of Philippi less than 21 days probably. And these people are connected. Well, they're connected because these people treated Paul selflessly. So when Paul writes to them to help them with the difficulties they're having in relationships, writes to them to tell them about joy, Paul's going to give them some prescriptions, things to do, and some proscriptions, things not to do. And so if we use this as an outline for how I interact with the church, how I interact in my community, how I interact with my spouse, how I interact with my in-laws, I think there's some valuable stuff here. And so this is not a passage necessarily about marriage, but it's about the relationship of the body of the church. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each of you esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. So when Paul writes to these people, he says, here's some things you do, here's some things you don't do. And the first thing he says is, don't let anything be done out of selfish ambition. Paul immediately says the foundation behind any relationship is going to be this idea of not being selfish. Now, if I could speak only one time to one audience on one topic, I'd speak on selfishness. I think it's the linchpin behind everything. When you think about selfishness is the common denominator behind all sin. Now you were talking about, how can murder be the same as lust? And how can lust be the same as gossip? Well, James chapter 1 says we are tempted by the lust or by the desires of what we want. James 1 says, you're not tempted by God. God doesn't tempt anybody. God can't be tempted. But we are drawn away and enticed by the things that we want. My individual sin and your individual sin, we don't have to get into the weeds and talk about what they are. My sin is the personal manifestation of selfishness in my life. And your sin is the personal manifestation of selfishness in your life. When you talk about airplane accidents and rock climbing accidents, you have two hazards: internal hazards, what's going on here; external hazards, what's going on out there. And when the internal and the external have an intersection, you get a tragedy. You get something going on with the climber and something in the environment changes. You get something going on inside the pilot and something with the plane changes. Anytime there's an internal and an external intersection, you get death. James chapter 1, when he talks about the sin cycle, hey, we're drawn away by what we like, what we want. But those two words, drawn away and enticed, those words convey the idea of bait in a trap or a lure on the end of a fishing line. So here's something I want. And it's not what you want. We're not talking about evil things. We're talking about that we have the capacity to want. And our wants get weaponized. I want my family to be well off. I want my family not to be poor. I want my family not to grow up as hard as I did. There's nothing wrong with that. Until I want it so bad I start missing church. Until I want it so bad I lie on my income taxes. I want it so bad I'll do something unscrupulous. I want to be well liked. I want people to like me. I want people to think I'm a nice guy. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Until I want to be well known or well liked to the point I compromise the truth. And I won't call sin sin. And I won't stand up for things. It's not what you want, but that you have the capacity to want. So selfishness is the common denominator behind all sin. Selfishness is probably antithetical to love. Now, I get it. The antonym for love is hate. But the antithesis for love is selfishness. See, if you hate me, you're at least thinking about me, at least occupying some of your time. You're plotting my demise. But if you are selfish, you don't think about me at all. You look at the number of people who in this world feel marginalized and ignored. There's this really, really crazy thing that happens with kids in social media, kids in video games, kids in the stuff. They isolate from their parents, they go to their room and they only play their game. And mom and dad don't make them come out and eat dinner with the family. Mom and dad don't make them do chores. And mom and dad don't make them do all this. And the kids feel like, well, they're doing fine without me. I don't matter. And then at the same time, they get so involved in their technology and they get so much dopamine being delivered to that brain because of the rapid cycling of those messages that can be delivered that they become so self-absorbed. So they're self-absorbed and they only think about themselves, but then they feel like nobody loves them, everybody hates them, and they should go out and eat worms. And it's a double whammy. And what happens is, because selfishness is the opposite of love. When I'm only thinking about me, I don't care about you. Selfishness is the opposite of Christianity. If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself. Take up his cross and follow me. Till you get a handle on self, you can't carry that cross. When Jesus talks about healthy relationships, he said, you want to fulfill the entire Old Testament law? Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. He says, love your neighbor as yourself. As you would that men should do to you, you do unto them. What that basically says is, until I know how to deal with me, I don't know how to deal with you. I can't think too highly of myself. I'm a narcissist. I can't think too lowly of myself. I'm codependent. Until I know how I have a proper balance with me, I really don't know how to deal with you. It's a thing we call emotional intelligence. And then when you talk about maturity as a Christian, how do you measure Christian maturity? And we have some things we like to say are objective measures. Church attendance, can you quote scripture, and what do you know, and do you love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and control of the self. When the apostle says, this is how you measure spiritual maturity, they are all about qualities, not about actions. They're not things that you do, they're things that you become. They're not things that you do, they're things that you are. And the keystone of that is self-control. Paul tells Timothy, You've not been given a spirit of fear, but love, power, and self-control. Some versions translate that as a sound mind. So until I get a handle on not being selfish, I can't do anything right. So Paul says, in your interactions as a church, in a community, in the city of Philippi, number one, don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Number two, don't do anything out of vain conceit. Some of the older translations call it vainglory. Don't do anything where you elevate your self-worth to a place that is inappropriate. Don't get to the place where you are thinking of yourself as more important than you should be. Romans 12 says, anybody should not think more highly of themselves than they ought to think. Avon Malone and Harding used to say, self-made men worship their makers. And it's a monument to unskilled labor. Okay? And so you've met those people, right? Who thought they were, all that in a bag of chips. And they thought they were the greatest thing. If you've ever run into anybody and their statement is, you don't know who I am. Well, you don't know who you are either. And I get it. We're smart. We're talented. We're gifted. We have the ability to do things. Okay? But what did you do to deserve to have smarts or talent or ability? So my daughter played Division I volleyball. And you look at my height and you go, wait a minute. I don't think, well, okay, she's 4'10". She's meaner than a one-eyed water moccasin. But she got her mom's athletic ability. She's quick, she's sharp, eye-hand coordination. I got a picture of her toes are on the ground, her knees are on the ground, and her ponytail's on the ground, bending backwards, dodging a volleyball, letting it go out of bounds. Just a delight to watch her play. I took her for a drive when she graduated high school. She just signed that D1 scholarship. And I said, honey, you may be the only D1 athlete to come out of Madison County High School. Okay? Now, you're not going to be the only D1 athlete at Troy University. They're lined up to take your place. I said, I know you've worked hard. I know you've given up a lot of things to do this. I said, but what did you do to deserve those little legs that run that fast? What did you do to deserve to have eye-hand coordination, track a volleyball? What did you do to deserve to have fast twitch muscles or just two arms at work? Two arms the same length or two legs the same length? I said, everything you're doing right now in life, you're doing on the back of a gift somebody gave you. And that's everything. I don't care if you're mechanically inclined. I don't care if you got a PhD in astrophysics. What did you do to deserve to have hands that just simply work? Eyes that work, lungs that breathe, brains that process information. Everything we have, we're doing on the back of a gift that somebody gave us. What did you do to deserve to be born in America? What did you do to deserve to be born in Southern America? I assume Missouri's in the South. It's about as far north as I ever get. I feel like I'm nearly in enemy territory. I don't know. But I'm from LA, Lower Alabama. But when you start thinking about how conceited we get, Paul says, don't do anything out of vain conceit. I get that we do things with what we've been given. We work hard, we study hard, we till the land, we repair things, we program things. But I can't brag. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Number two, don't do anything out of vain conceit. One of my favorite stories is about a picnic on the grounds at a place in Texas. And the people are lined up to come through the line and get their food, and this lady's handing out chicken fingers. And she gives this guy 3 chicken fingers. And the guy says, madam, I'd like more than 3 chicken fingers. And she said, sir, you can only have 3 chicken fingers. He said, you don't realize that I need more than 3 chicken fingers. I'm a big guy and I'm hungry. She said, well, sir, I can only give you 3 chicken fingers. And the guy finally says, well, ma'am, you probably don't know who I am. And she said, no, sir, I'm sorry, I don't know who you are. He said, I'm the governor of the great state of Texas. Now she's caught off guard. She's embarrassed. She said, governor, I didn't recognize you without your suit. You look taller on TV. I'm terribly, terribly, terribly sorry that I didn't recognize who you are. But you probably don't know who I am. He said, lady, I have no idea who you are. She said, I'm the lady that hands out the chicken fingers. And it really doesn't matter who you are. It kind of determines on which side of the table you're at and how close you are to the chicken fingers. And a lot of times we get this idea that you don't know, and Paul says, quit. Stop that. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. And don't do anything out of this idea that I have some great importance. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. But in lowliness of mind. Love is the intentional. That's a cognitive shift. I'm going to choose to think about me this way. And I'm going to choose to think about you that way. In lowliness of mind, esteem others better than yourself. Now, we may elaborate on this a little more, but I call it the as-if principle. I'm an imperfect person. I live with an imperfect person, and I do imperfect things. And some of those things have the power to hurt. They have the power to kind of reset. And I don't really know, you don't get to choose what is traumatic. Okay? Things can happen to you and they occupy a place in your brain, and for whatever reason you quote unquote can't get over it. I get that. I specialize in trauma. I'm with those guys when they shoot and they get shot at. You know, I've been there when we recovered the bodies. I've been there when we buried the officers. I've seen some terrible stuff. I picked up a motorcycle helmet one day that had a head in it. The buildings were still smoking in New York City. And my pager went off. And when my pager goes off, it's a SWAT thing. Well, I show up at these apartments and there are no SWAT guys there. I'm used to seeing a line of black unmarked cars and dudes in armor. Investigator Hamilton walked out and said, and there are no SWAT guys there. I step under the tape and walk in this apartment and there's two bodies. This guy shot her, shot himself. You have to go tell the 6-year-old. And she's not going to be here to pick him up. That was the morning of 9/11. The afternoon of 9/11 is when I found the motorcycle helmet. And I do okay with that. It's been several years ago. I think about it some, but it really doesn't bother me. I drive through that intersection all the time, drive by that little school all the time. 6 weeks ago, we served a warrant on a guy. And when I say we, I was on the truck. Remember, I don't have any bullets. We got this big black F-550 with armor on it called a Bearcat. It has an extendable ram on the front of it that will move a house off its foundation. They put my podcast sticker on the ram, by the way. So if you get served a warrant by the SWAT team, the first thing you get to see that comes through your wall is Keeping Up with Jones. The Lonnie Jones. You get to rethink your life choices. Well, they crash in this door. I'm just sitting on the truck and, shining the spotlights or whatever. And over the radio says, there are children in the house. Now this fool's dealing fentanyl. And he's got pounds of it. And a guy with a machine gun and a helmet walks out on the porch with this little fat girl, about the size of my grandson Gage. Well, I got off the truck and went to the porch, and he gave me that baby. And I pulled my helmet off and I pulled my mask off. And I'm standing in the street at 1:30 in the morning singing to this little black girl. And the red lights are flashing and the blue lights are flashing. And I see our shadows, and I see the shadows of men with machine guns. And that bothers me. And I don't know why. I've seen the bodies, I've seen the heads, I've seen the blood. But I can't get that little girl out of my mind. I don't know how trauma works. You don't get to choose. Sometimes something will happen in your marriage. Somebody will say something or do something or not say something or not do something, and it sticks. And I'm a pretty resilient person. I've done this thing I do with the cops for 32 years. And if I were shy or squeamish, I'd be done. But that little girl, and I don't know if it was holding a little girl wearing body armor, or if it was singing to her in the dark. I don't know what the deal was. Your spouse may do something or say something. In lowliness of mind, that's cognition, that's change the way you think. And the way you think affects how you behave. I wrote a book for the jiu-jitsu crowd. It's called Grappling with Life, Controlling Your Inside Space. And the first principle is, whoever controls your head controls your body. If you give me access to your head, I can make your body go anywhere or do anything. Well, whoever controls that thought process controls how you behave. Well, guess who controls your thought process? In lowliness of mind, esteem others better. First principle, the obvious principle from Philippians is, I'm going to choose to treat you as if you're more important than me. That's it. Now, I may not really think you're more important than me. I may think I'm smarter than you and better looking. But what would it look like if I treated you as if you were the most important? What would it look like if I treated you as if I respected you? What would it look like if I treated you as if I loved you? What would it look like if I treated you as if you were forgiven? Now, I may not feel like you're forgiven, but I know what it would look like if I treated you that way. I may not think you're behaving in a way that I respect, but what would it look like if I treated you as if I respected you? See, when you change the way you decide to think about somebody, you absolutely have the ability to control how you treat someone. And Paul says, don't do anything out of selfish ambition. That's changing the way you think about yourself. But in lowliness of mind, esteem others better than yourself. This vain conceit, I get rid of that. And instead of me being the most important, what would it look like if I treated you as if you were the most important person? That solves everything, doesn't it? If I treat you as if you're more important, if I treat you as if you're respected, if I treat you as if you're loved, and if I treat you as if you're... Now, I'm not talking about being disingenuous. I'm not talking about being hypocritical. I'm not talking about being duplicitous. Hey, I've got a choice for how I act with you. And I can let my emotions control how I behave, or I can let my intellect control how I behave. I can let the flesh control how I behave, or I can let the spirit control how I behave. So I can change the dynamic of any relationship simply by deciding this is how I'm going to treat somebody. I don't always agree with my elders. But the New Testament says that I certainly have to view these men that God and the Holy Spirit put in charge of my congregation. And since I'm not qualified to be an elder and they are, guess what I do? I treat them as if I'm submissive. And in the areas I agree and the areas I disagree, guess what I do? I submit. Why? That's a choice. And it's the same thing when I interact with you, whether you're my friend, my neighbor, my boss, my employee, my fellow member of the church, or my spouse. In lowliness of mind, esteem others as better than you. And then he wraps up and says, and do not look only for your own interest, but also for the interest of others. The idea of the usness. I can sit in a room and talk to a couple and say, tell me your story. And if I hear I, me, and my, I know we're in trouble. But if I hear us, we, and our, I think we've got something we can work with. And it's just the idea of how you tell the story of you. And instead of looking out for my interest, I look out for the interest of others. Because if I live in this thing where it's just about what I want and what I like and what I choose, and I never think about you or us. And it's got to be super important that when I start considering you as more important, and I start considering you as more special, and I start thinking about our interest and not just my interest, it's got to be selflessness. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, costly investment. It's got to be giving. Not giving in, not giving up, not giving out, but giving. And if I can't just purely give, let love be without hypocrisy, what that means is I don't treat you in a way expecting your behavior to change. I treat you the way I treat you because that's the way I treat you. Does that make sense? And just, it's probably not in a marriage seminar. When you start talking about limit setting and boundaries, you know, somebody's behaving in a toxic way, somebody's outside that bell curve of behavior. You know, Romans 12 says, as much as possible, as much as it depends on you, live at peace with all men. That verse used to scare me to death. You guys know who Brian Regan is? Regan's a goofy comedian. He says, you're 6 years old, you're sitting in front of a TV set playing with your Lego blocks. Smokey Bear shows up, he says, only you can prevent forest fires. Me? I'm 6 years old. That's a lot of pressure. You know, well, I used to read Romans 12. As much as possible, as much as depends on you, you get along with these folks. off pressure. Really what the apostle is saying is control the controllables. As much as possible intimates, sometimes it may not be possible. As much as it depends on you, intimates, sometimes it may not be possible. There are toxic, dangerous people that sometimes you have to put limits and boundaries on. Whoever manages the distance manages the damage. And sometimes I have to keep you away from me in order to be safe in general relationships. So when I start talking about, how do I treat these people? Well, if you're being toxic or you're not behaving and I put a boundary on you or put a limit on you, that limit and that boundary is not designed to change your behavior. If I do A, Brad will do B. Well, I'm just manipulating Brad. It's manipulation and control. My boundaries have nothing to do with your behavior. My boundaries deal with how I respond to your behavior. You can do anything you want to, but it's not going to affect me. I'm not going to let it stress me. I'm not going to let it depress me. I'm not going to let it cause me this angst. And so learning how to respond to toxic things is the idea that I'm going to put boundaries up, but they're not designed to change your behavior. They're designed to change my response to your behavior. So I'm not just going to look out for my interest, but I'm going to look out for our interest. Now, undebatable is your needs come before my rights every single time. We get into a situation in a church, we get into a situation with a family, we get into a situation with my spouse, your needs come before my rights. Romans 12, Romans 8, Romans 14, 1 Corinthians. You take a weak brother and a strong brother, the strong brother takes care of the needs of the weak brother. Well, I take care of the needs of my spouse because she comes first. Now, what about when it's not a need but it's a want? Well, smart money is sometimes I let your wants take control. Now, when I do, it's got to be genuine. It's got to be giving. Not giving in, not giving up, not giving out. I don't care what color you paint the living room. I don't. I can't tell the difference between those colors anyway. Somebody sold you a bill of goods when they said that eggshell white and white eggshell are two different colors. That's just a lie. Nobody can see the difference in those colors. Not with the natural eye. But if you want to paint the living room, as long as I ain't got to paint it, you can paint any color you want to paint it. I don't care where we eat. I can say chicken in 9 languages. It's not hard for me to walk in and go, you got one of these, and they'll bring it to you. I don't care where we eat. And so for me to fight about where we eat or what to watch on TV, those are inconsequential issues. Your needs always come before my rights. And a lot of times I can give you on your wants and your likes above my wants and likes as long as it's genuine, as long as I'm giving. My dad, he comes over and hunts. And my dad's 86. I don't know how long he hasn't been hunting without us. He won't hunt without me or my brother. And of course, Dad comes in for a weekend. Jackie fixes a big pot of soup, and then we come in the woods and we just warm it up and we just eat. We're up on Kill Mountain, and it's just nothing's moved. It's a terrible day. I tell Dad, I said, well, we can sit up here till dark, or we can go get something to eat. He said, well, I think I'd like to have something to eat. And now he's in his 80s. And I said, well, now we can drop off this side of the mountain, eat Miller's barbecue. We can drop off that side of the mountain and eat just a hamburger place, or we can go home and eat soup. He said, let's get something. He said, just between me and you, I don't like soup. I said, you've been eating Jackie's soup for 10 years at my house. He goes, I wouldn't do nothing to hurt her feelings. Well, my dad's always been that way with my mom. My dad's always been that way with my wife. And he didn't think a thing about it. When you keep score, and when you remember, I did and you didn't, or you did and I didn't, then you're not giving. You're giving in, you're giving up, you're giving out. It's got to be just giving. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. In lowliness of mind, I'm changing the way I think. I'm going to esteem you as better than me. That means your needs come first, your wants come first, and your likes come first, as long as it's giving, not giving in, not giving out, not giving up. That distinction makes sense? Now, that's basically the core of what Paul is telling these folks. But he doesn't stop there. Like all good church preachers, he's going to illustrate his sermon. And so Paul says, don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. But in lowliness of mind, esteem others better than yourself. Let each of you look not out for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who, being in the very form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and taking the form of a bondservant, and coming in the likeness of men, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death on the cross. Paul gives us these principles. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. In lowliness of mind, esteem others better than yourself. Don't just look out for your interest, look out for the other interest. And let me put some bones on that. Let me illustrate it. Let me tell you the story of Jesus. And when Paul tells the story of Jesus, he does not start in the manger. When Paul tells the story of Jesus, he starts in the throne room of heaven. This is your attitude. Love is the intentional. This is a choice. Let your attitude, let your mind be the same as Christ, who, being in the very form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God. Jesus and God were considered as the same. And it wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't against the rules. It wasn't a faux pas. If you walked into the throne room of heaven and you decided to lay on your face in front of one of the three thrones, you can lay in front of any throne. Because it's the triune God. I'm not sure I can explain that. I'm Oxford educated, but it's Oxford, Alabama. Okay? So there's a problem. There's some finiteness going on there somewhere. You know, you get into the letter that John wrote. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. There's this thing in Greek, you have the presence of the definite article. It looks like the letter O, and it has a rough breathing symbol, and it's pronounced ho. And so you see that, and you see it in front of the Greek word, that is the name for God. Okay? In the beginning was the Word was with God, and then the Word was God. And the definite article is missing. And so it works the same way as our capital letter. If, hey, this is my son, and his name is Buck, versus I was walking in the woods, and I saw a buck. Right? So what do you do with that? In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was a God? No, that's not appropriate. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was deity. That's probably accurate, but we just don't use words like that. Well, if you'll allow me, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God substance. God stuff. God material. Well, how does that work? Well, if I have a glass of water on this stage, what's the chemical formula for water? H2O. If I take that water and I freeze it, and it becomes a hydroxide, it becomes ice. What's the chemical formula for ice? Well, that would be H2O. And if I take that water and I heat it up so that it becomes a water vapor, what's the chemical formula for water vapor? Oh my. You've got 100% water in 3 different manifestations. Now, there's a false doctrine called modalism that says you can only have it at one place at one time. Well, in John chapter 17, Jesus is talking to the Father about the Spirit. I've hunted on some of those cold mornings, and that little stream have a sheet of ice over it. And underneath that sheet of ice, you've got flowing water. And on top of that sheet of ice, you've got mist. 100% water. 3 distinct manifestations, but absolutely water, water, water. God the Father, God the Son, God the Spirit. let this mind be in you that was also in Christ Jesus, who, being God, did not consider it robbery. It wasn't inappropriate. It wasn't something to be grasped. It wasn't something to be grappled for. He was God. But he made himself of no reputation. He came to earth as a man. Now, what did that look like? It's interesting if you think about it, because Jesus could have been any kind of a person he wanted to have been. He's coming to start a kingdom. So let's suppose just, as a kind of a weekend adventure, we decided, hey, let's go to a little island in the Caribbean and let's take over. If we wanted to go take over someplace, if we want to go start a kingdom, as Americans, we'd use 3 strategies. Strategy number 1, we'd use popularity. We start a Facebook campaign, we start social media, we get us a TikTok channel, we YouTube it, we start advertising, and we earn the popular vote. Could Jesus have had rock star popularity? Suppose Jesus had just announced, I will be in the Coliseum doing miracles. Every night, every seat, every venue, standing room only. How many times did he go somewhere to be by himself and a crowd would follow him around the lake? How many times did he heal somebody and say, don't tell anybody what I've done for you? Jesus didn't come to earth to be a rock star when he established his kingdom. Well, if we don't going to do it with popularity as Americans, we throw money at it. We just go down and invest in infrastructure. Roads, bridges, buildings, and ballparks. We tell folks, look what we can do with our money. I'm afraid we've tried to convert the third world with money. And they fall in love with their money, not a Messiah. Could Jesus have been wealthy beyond belief? I was bow fishing with a guy the other night, and a fish got up out of the mud, and a guy, a fisherman named Darryl Pickle, he just shot an arrow at the wake and hit that fish. I said, you better check that fish's mouth for money. Your temple tax may be due, because that was a miraculous shot. There may be gold in that fish. If you can turn stones into bread, you can turn stones into gold. How'd you like to have been in the restaurant business with Jesus? I'd call my restaurant, bring a biscuit, feed everybody. Because it really doesn't matter what you brought, he could make it happen. Foxes have holes. Birds have nests. The Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. He didn't come here to be an entrepreneur. He had a robe and a cloak, and they divided that and sold it when they murdered him. So if we're going to go take over a little island in the Caribbean, and we're not going to use popularity, we're not going to use money, we use military might. We use the shock and awe of the United States military. Every day of my life, I see a Black Hawk and an Apache helicopter. They outfit them in a company called Ulista out on the Redstone Arsenal where we live. A guy told me he could take a fully armored Apache helicopter and wipe out the city of Huntsville with it. He said, if you let me hang everything on it, they let me hang. I could take a city of 250,000 people and turn it to rubble. If Jesus had wanted to be a military leader, those guys standing there when he rode into Jerusalem yelling, save, save now, you realize he wouldn't have used people? He tells Peter, hey, put your sword up. My Father will put at my disposal 12 legions of angels. I mean, you assume a legion of angels has 6,000 men. 12 legions, 72,000 angels. We sing the song, he could have called 10,000 angels. We only miss it by 62,000 angels. Okay? One angel in 2 Kings 19 killed 185,000 Assyrians. Now, if that's the average batting average of an unarmed angel, and you extrapolate that to 72,000, you're not going to win that war. You understand that? I made this statement in Miami, Florida. And after the services, a guy came out. He had a visitor's card. Looked like Wile E. Coyote had been working on it. He had all these scribbles. He said, your statement about the angels piqued my curiosity. He said, I took a 10-hour day and a kill ratio of 185,000 per. He said, with those numbers, you can take today's world population and destroy it in 3.36 hours. That's everything big enough to die in 3 hours with 72,000 angels. But when Jesus came to earth, he wasn't a rock star. He wasn't an entrepreneur, and he didn't come as a military leader. He came as a servant. The special word here in Greek is doulos. We have two words in Greek for servant. One is diakonoi, deacon, and the other one is doulos. Doulos means a bond servant. It's a servant that's sold into slavery because he was young and he was poor and he was uneducated. And if you brought one to your house, his job was to wash people's feet. And on the first century slave market, a doulos could be purchased for 30 pieces of silver. You want to change fundamentally everything in every relationship you have? Love, intimacy, trust, selflessness. You have the mind in you that was in Christ. Because he had the power, he had the authority, he had the title, he had the throne. He was God. But instead of flexing his muscles and being rich and being famous and being powerful, he was a servant. The last thing he did with the 12 as a group, including Judas, was wash their feet. And he said, you call me Lord and Master, and that's right, that's what I am. But if I, your Lord and Master, will wash your feet, you need to learn to wash each other's feet. Paul says, if you really want to change the dynamic of every relationship you've ever been in or ever will be in, you have the mind of Christ. Don't do anything out of selfish ambition. Don't do anything out of vain conceit. Don't do anything except change and think about the importance of other people. And then instead of thinking about just you, think about their interest. And by the way, imitate Jesus. And he was God. He is God. But he came to this earth to be a servant. A disciple, perfectly trained, will be like his master. If my master is a servant, the greatest thing I can ever hope to become is a servant. What would happen if you went home today and decided to serve your spouse? What happened if you went to work tomorrow or Monday and decided, I'm just going to serve these people? Now, they may pay me, they may not, but I'm going to serve them. What would happen if you just went to your neighborhood and said, I'm going to serve? When you make that intentional decision that I'm going to serve people, even if it costs me a little bit, I don't care what you give back to me, and I don't care if you deserve it, I'm just going to do that. What would happen to every relationship that you have? Love is the intentional, and if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It doesn't require reciprocity. It is not contingent on the fact that you deserve it or don't deserve it. It's a choice that I make and something I decide to do. And I treat you as if you were worthy of it, whether you're worthy of it or not. Just think what that would do if we just decided in our marriages to serve our spouses. All right, they tell me that we need to break and we're going to eat lunch. And they tell me it's barbecue.